So today I'm going to do my first video that's going to be related to the playoffs that's going to start on Friday this week. And what I'm going to do in this video is that I'm going to look at these 18 playoff team and I'm going to put them in each of these four tiers. And for the first tier, I am going to put 3 out of these 18 teams that I think are the favorites of potentially winning MLS Cup, and that these 3 teams are the most likely ones that's going to lift the trophy in December. And in tier 2, I'm going to put 5 teams that I think they could definitely make a deep playoff run, and that these are the teams that not necessarily are going to be considered favorites, but these are definitely teams that can get into like a deep playoff run, such as a semifinal or a conference final, or even go all the way to MLS Cup. Tier 3 is the tier that I'm going to put 5 teams that I think are the dark horse team, also known as the sleeper team, because these are the team that a lot of people are going to be sleeping on, and that they don't expect these teams to make much noise in the playoffs, and when they do play in the playoffs, they basically prove them wrong. And in other words, I would say that these are the team that if you're the favorites and you have to play one of these dark horse team, yeah, that's not a really good feeling, and this is something you don't want to see, because they can easily create a bit of an upset in that kind of fixture. And finally, for the last tier, I'm going to put 5 teams that I think is going to be long shots in terms of winning this competition. And these are usually teams that, if you look at the bet line, they have these crazy amount of odds, like 500 to 1 or 1,000 to 1 to win MLS Cup. And that there's a lot that needs to go right in terms of for these teams to potentially win the whole competition. So we start off with the favorites. And by the way, before I begin this video is kind of a ranking video where, I of course put each of these team in different tiers. But what is not a ranking video about this one is the fact that from each tier, let's say in tier 2, and you see all these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 number, that's not a ranking system. It doesn't mean that at number 1 that is the most likely team that is going to make a deep playoff run, and pretty much that's can be said about the favorites, where at number 1 that is not the one that I'm going to say is going to be the biggest favorite compared to what would be at number 3 in terms of being in tier 1 of the favorites to win MLS Cup. But speaking of which, at number 1, I am going to say the Seattle Sounders as one of the favorites. There's no doubt that the defending the defending champion is going to be once again considered the favorites, because they definitely have a team that can really not only make a deep run into the playoffs, but can easily repeat in terms of winning MLS Cup. The only thing that I am a little bit concerned about the Sounders is the fact that they have to play LAFC in the first round, and that's always kind of a matchup that you would think that should be a matchup that could happen maybe in the semifinal or even in the final of the conference. But unfortunately, one of those teams had to go, and we might potentially see one team that are going to be favorites heading into MLS Cup this year, and that they could suffer an early exit. But other than that, if they can get past that obstacle, this is definitely a team that I think is the team to beat in the Western Conference, and that, again, they definitely have a decent enough squad that they can, of course, make a deep playoff run, and that the only thing that they need to worry is that first game against LAFC, where the other thing I will also mention is that they're going to be a little bit depleted, and that depending on if some of those players that went on international duty just this past week are going to be available in that game, that could also play a factor that they could easily suffer a early playoff exit if they aren't able to beat LAFC in the first round. Now, at number 2, I'm going to say it's the Supporters' Shield winner, Philadelphia Union. Now, I know there's always this cliche saying that, when you win the Supporters' Shield, you tend to not win MLS Cup. And then there's always this kind of curse with the Supporters' Shield, where there's not a lot of Supporters' Shield winners that are able to follow up to potentially win MLS Cup the very, very same season. But I really think with this Union team, this is definitely a team that's capable of going all the way and winning this competition. And especially, I feel like this Union team kind of reminds me a little bit of the 2018 FC Dallas team. Remember when I talked about the 2018 Dallas team, where this is kind of a team where they don't really have a star player on that team, but what makes them very dangerous is that there's always going to be a guy on that team that's going to step up and score a goal, and they always find a way in terms of win games. That is what this Union team is all about this season. Like, there's really no star players on this team. There's multiple guys on this team that can really threaten you and can definitely score a goal at any times, and they always find ways to win games even if they're in a difficult situation. And that just makes a team, when you have that kind of team, that just makes it a team that is very hard to beat. And especially the fact that they pretty much is going to have home field advantage throughout the entire playoffs. And in other words, since they're the Supporter Shield winner, you know, if somebody's going to win MLS Cup, they're going to have to go through Philadelphia. And knowing the fact that the Union is perfect this season at home with a 9-0-0 record, yeah, there's really not a lot of people are going to be betting against them of potentially making a deep run or even being the favorites of winning this competition, because they've been so good at home. And this is also a team that's hard to beat, because there's just so many weapons on this team, and they always will find a way in terms of winning a game. Now, at number 3, I am going to say the other Cascadia team, that is the Portland Timbers. So, you know how I said earlier that, you know, the Sounders, they are able to beat LAFC. They should have enough to potentially go through all the way to MLS Cup. Well, here's the problem. If they do beat LAFC, and if the Timbers are able to dispatch FC Dallas in the playoffs, that means we are once again going to have another Cascadia derby in the playoffs. And knowing the fact that the last time both of these teams meet in the Cascadia derby and the Timbers were able to win that, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Timbers fans that's going to be confident that the fact that they can, of course, beat the Seattle Sounders, especially when you look at the last couple of Cascadia derby, or even this season alone. The Sounders have only won one Cascadia derby, and that was all the way back when the season was resumed back in August, where they were able to win 3-0. But ever since that, they haven't been able to taste victory in the Cascadia derby. And that, you know, I think the Timbers, if there's one team that can definitely stop Seattle from being the team that I think are going to be the favorites coming out of the West, it's definitely going to be the Portland Timbers, because they know how to beat the Seattle Sounders, not only in the regular season, but they have proven they can do it in the postseason too. Now, in tier number 2, the team that I think that could definitely make a deep playoff run, but are not considered the favorites. At number 1, I'm going to say Toronto FC. Now, I was going to think about putting TFC right on the top echelon of this list, but the one reason why I didn't put them in the top echelon is the form that they had finished the season. And, you know, there's this old cliched saying that when you are heading to the playoffs, you don't want to head to the playoffs in a pretty cold streak, because once you head to the playoffs in a pretty cold streak, yeah, when you are about to face a hot team in the playoffs, that could definitely cause you some problem. And that for TFC, there's no doubt that they're heading to the playoffs with a bit of a cold streak, with the way that they have really struggled down the stretch. But that being said, we saw what happened in 2018 with Atlanta, and how they were also heading to the playoffs with a relatively cold streak, and people were questioning whether or not if Atlanta is going to be firing back all cylinders, as we saw for the majority of their season in 2018. And guess what? They did. They were able to get back to the level that what make them good for the majority of the season, and they went on to win MLS Cup. So for TFC, they're hoping that that's going to be the same story for them, where when playoff time does come, they can of course able to find the form that they were so good for the beginning of the season, and knowing the fact that this is also a very experienced playoff team, and a team that usually go deep into the playoffs when they of course made it. I have no doubt that TFC is one of those teams that they can definitely make it all the way in the Eastern Conference, and that if we're going to see a rematch between the Union versus TFC, maybe down in the conference final, boy, that is going to be a delicious kind of matchup, and that is going to be hard to call which team is potentially going to win it. But at number 2, I am going to say LAFC. Now, again, I could have easily put LAFC in the favorites, or at least I think a lot of media people will be angry at me for putting LAFC not in their favorites, because every media people members always say LAFC are the favorites of winning MLS Cup, and in some way they're not wrong with the way that if LAFC does get back most of their star players, this team is definitely going to be a very dangerous team heading into the playoffs, and knowing the fact that this year they have even an extra weight on their shoulder with the way that they want to redeem themselves after what happened last year of them choking in the Western Conference Final. They want to obviously make it to get far into the playoffs. However, just like what I said about Seattle, they have a very challenging task in that first round game against the Seattle Sounders, and then the very next one they have to play against the Timbers, which they've been doing well against the Portland Timbers, but you never know. That could be a different Timbers team that they might face in the regular season. And as I said, the Timbers, they're always very dangerous when they are in the playoffs. So yeah, for LAFC, I'm just going to put them in the team that could, of course, make a deep playoff run, and that in some way they are going to make a deep playoff run this season. They're going to have to do it the hard way, as they're going to be facing a lot of good teams in each round heading into, if they want to get out of the Western Conference and represent the Western Conference as the team that's going to be in MLS Cup. But at number 3, I am going to say Orlando City. And, this Orlando team, they proved that they could definitely make a deep playoff run, despite the fact that this is their first season in the playoffs. Although I'm pretty sure Orlando fans will say that this is their second time in the playoffs, because they're going to count the MLS's back tournament playoffs as a legitimate first time that they ever make it to the playoffs. But when we saw that playoff run that they had in the MLS's back tournament, it definitely proved that this is a team that could definitely make a deep playoff run. Although, just like what I said about LAFC, they have a very tough matchup in their first round, and probably one that I think is probably the most underrated matchup in the first round of the playoffs is Orlando versus NYCFC. Like, that matchup, you have a Orlando team that is well coached by Oscar Pereira, and it's a very fun team to play against an NYCFC team that is considered one of the hottest teams down the stretch. So this is definitely no easy task for Orlando in their first ever actual playoff game at home, but we shall see whether or not if they can get past that hurdle, because if they can get past that hurdle, things are going to be a little bit easier for them, and that they should be able to make another deep playoff run, and maybe even go all the way into MLS Cup or even the conference final in the Eastern Conference. But at number 5, I am going to say, or actually at number 4, I am going to say Sporting KC. Now, I know, again, as many people will probably ask me, why do I put Sporting KC at 4th position, and why do I always kind of don't give Sporting KC a lot of respect with the way that they're in the top spot? And, I'm not saying that I'm disrespecting Sporting KC with the way that I keep saying that they are a team that, I just don't know what's going to happen when they're in the playoffs, because they just don't kind of look like that team that you would think that kind of should belong in the first position. And maybe the reason why they got into the first position is because of the fact that they had a relatively easy schedule. And, there's definitely argument for that. When you look at the last 8 games of the season, they have only played 3 teams that is in a playoff position, and all 3 of those teams wasn't even near the top 4. Like, one of those teams, Nashville, they play against them at home, and Nashville was down to 10 men for the remaining of the game. And then the other one against Colorado was a game where the Rapids just played their first game in over a month, and that they were kind of rusty in that game, and therefore it was kind of expected that Sporting KC was going to destroy Colorado in that one. And then the other one against FC Dallas, they lost that one. They lost 1-0 in that game, albeit it was a very controversial game, and they probably should have got a draw out of that one. But like I said, Sporting KC, with such an easy schedule that they've been playing, it is really hard to call whether or not if this is actually a team that is ready to go into the playoffs, where they're going to play much tougher opponent heading into the playoffs, and that they can of course, go toe-to-toe against them, or the fact that they're just going to be pretenders, and that it seemed like when they do play against top teams, that's when they start to struggle because they just don't have enough firepower into this team. And especially the fact that heading into the first round against the Quakes, I know for a fact that maybe the Sporting KC is not going to have Polito, who of course is on the injury reserve, and because of that, and knowing the fact that we've seen before when they don't have Polito on that attack, this team does not look as good as a team that has Polito in their starting 11. So that will be interesting to see heading into the playoffs, where can they actually be a decent team, or can they actually make it a deep playoff run, or the fact that this is just all their games that they played this season that they of course got wins was kind of just false hope, and that in some way they're just kind of like the pretender of the league. Now at number 5, I am going to say the Columbus Crew as the 5th team that could make a deep playoff run. Now what concerns me about the Columbus Crew is that when they do make a deep playoff run, when they do get to, let's say, the conference semifinal or the conference final, most likely they're going to have to play on the road. And that is what makes me concerned about this Crew team, because this season they have not shown that they can go on the road and able to get a win during that. And this is also when they do have a healthy team where they still weren't able to get themselves a win into the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see if that will change once they get into the playoffs. The Crew is also another team that's known to have some good playoff experience and known to go deep into the playoffs, and they definitely have a very good squad, and especially some of the guys that they've been desperate to be back into their squad because of them being on the IR list are back in this team. They definitely have the experience of potentially making a deep playoff run. But my concern is if they do have to go on the road, that's when I am very worried about this team, and that maybe they're not going to get through that hurdle because of the fact that they have not won a road game this season, and they have really struggled this season when they have to play on the road. Now, in terms of Tier 3, in terms of the dark horses, at number 1, it is going to be none other than the Colorado Rapids, who there's no doubt that I think if you want to talk about who is the biggest dark horse heading into the playoffs, it's none other than the Rapids. I mean, the Rapids, they have fresher legs. They don't have to deal with injury concern that a lot of these teams had to deal with. And this is also a team that can definitely pull off some big upset, just like what we saw down the stretch when they were able to go into Portland and able to grab a 1-0 win in that, and then able to win convincingly against the Seattle Sounders by winning 3-1 in that game. So, yeah, this is a team that they can definitely stand up against some of the top team in the Western Conference, and there's just no doubt that no one really wants to play the Rapids right now, with the way that, as I said, they are a much fresher team than any other team in the league, because they had to play as much of the games, and also the fact that this is a team that is known to be able to create upset, especially down the stretch. Now, at number 2 is kind of the Eastern Conference version of a dark horse team, and that, of course, is Nashville. Now, I know, as I said before, expansion team, they don't have a good history of when they get to the playoffs, they make a deep run, and I don't expect Nashville to be a team that will make it very far, like maybe the conference semifinal or even the conference final. But one thing that maybe could be the reason where they could maybe get to that stage, and depending on if their defense, which has just been rock solid throughout this year, is going to continue to be in that form in the playoffs, and they will just get enough on the attacking end, this team can really surprise a lot of people heading into the playoffs. And again, this is another team where you definitely do not want to play, because they're going to frustrate the hell out of you with the way that they play, and they're not going to give you a lot of space to operate. And I know there's some Eastern Conference team that they do have trouble in terms of trying to break down a low block, just what Nashville does pretty much every single game, and I won't be surprised if those teams that do struggle with a low block and some of those top teams in the Eastern Conference won't be able to beat Nashville because of the way that they just cannot solve the bunker that Nashville decided to put against them on the attack. So at number 3, I am going to say NYCFC. Now, I was thinking about putting NYCFC in tier number 2, as this is a team that I could think that they could, of course, make a deep playoff run. But the only reason why I decided not to put them in tier 2 is because we've seen this before with NYCFC when they, of course, made it to the playoffs, and you think they can make a deep playoff run, and then they basically got themselves eliminated in the second round and in the first round, and they just cannot get themselves past the second round. But what's interesting about NYCFC and why I would label them as a dark horse is the fact that, you know, they have been one of the hottest team heading into the playoffs, and that this is also another team that I don't think a lot of people have been talking about how good this team has, and it's kind of almost as if I feel like this is becoming a very underrated team in the Eastern Conference, and that, you know, if they can, of course, shake that choker kind of label off them heading into this playoffs and actually continue to look as good as they have down the stretch, this team can definitely make a deep playoff run and can finally able to fulfill the expectation that I think a lot of NYCFC fans have with this team, which is they want to see this team make a deep playoff run and at least challenge for MLS Cup and don't just suffer playoff fatigue so early as they have been doing for the past couple of seasons. Now, at number 4, I am going to say Minnesota. And, you know, for the Loons, the only thing I will say about them is that they can, of course, make a deep playoff run, and that the only way they can do it is if there is going to be those international players back into this starting 11, and also some of those guys that have been on the IR list for a very long time is going to be coming back into the starting 11. So some of these guys like Ozzy Alonso, Hassani Dotson, or even maybe Iko Para is going to be back in this team. There is no doubt that this team would be much dangerous than the team that is currently right now, that is just a very little self of its team. And that, you know, again, it's a big if, the fact that we're going to get most of our most important player that is on the IR list back in this season, and also those international players that's on duty. You know, I know they're going to be back in the second round, but the question is, are we even going to get to the second round, knowing the fact that we need them the most in the first round against another dark horse team, as I mentioned, the Colorado Rapids, and the team that I also mentioned you do not want to play against them in the first round, and that could really be an early playoff exit just like last season. So I am definitely very concerned about the Loons heading into the playoffs because of that. But if they can, of course, get past that hurdle and they get guys back healthy, this is definitely a dark horse team, and a team that can definitely make a deep run into the playoffs. Now, at number 5, the last team that I think is a dark horse is none other than the New England Revolution. And, you know, the Revs, I know this could be a very good team in the Eastern Conference. And the reason why I say this could be a good team in the Eastern Conference is they have the attacking talent to do that. I mean, the likes of Carlos Gil, Gustavo Bo, and even Adam Buxod, those are very good attacking pieces that they had. And also, not even forget to mention Teal Bunbury, who has really looked bang in form down the stretch. This team can definitely have a very dynamic attack, and we haven't even got to the defensive part where they're one of the most solid defensive team in the league. The only issue of why I've put them as a dark horse team and not a team that could make a deep run or even consider the favorites is that their attack has not been consistent. Like, there's been times where the attack has really stutter, and if you just kind of throw a home game for the Revs this season, that usually does not end very well, which that's why I'm very concerned in terms of that first round matchup against Montreal, where they are playing at home, which is pretty much their arch enemy this season, and also can that attack actually be consistent in the playoffs and actually fulfill the potential. Like, there is definitely potential that attack could be very dangerous, but the question is, can that attack actually click heading into the playoffs? And hopefully, if Bruce Arena can basically turn the clock back a couple of years and maybe get this team deep into the playoffs, who knows? I mean, this could be definitely an interesting playoffs for the Rams, and that I have no doubt that if this team can play up to the potential that they can definitely have, this is a team that can definitely make a deep playoff run. Now, moving on into the long shot, which again, I do apologize if I'm going to put some of these teams in the long shot. I'm not saying that they had no chance of making the playoffs. I mean, one of these teams maybe could make a surprise run to go deep into the playoffs, but most likely these are kind of the first 5 teams you can think that could most likely be the first one to be eliminated. And the first one I'll say is none other than the Quakes. And, I was kind of skeptical of the fact that whether or not should I actually put the Quakes in tier number 3, because I can definitely see this team being a dark horse with the way that there's times where they can definitely play to be one of the best team in the Western Conference, and if that attack, of course, can get clicking and the defense can be solid, then they can definitely beat anybody on any given day. However, the problem is they don't do that very often. They might do it like maybe one or twice every 4 games, and then the other 2 games they look like one of the worst team in the Western Conference. So it's almost like a toss-up in terms of what I expect from the Quakes, and that I'm really hoping when we get into the first round of the playoffs against SKC, that needs to be a team that is the good version of the Quakes and not the bad version of the Quakes, where if that's the bad version of the Quakes against SKC, then yeah, SKC just got another easy game in the playoffs and they automatically get into the second round because of that. Now, at number 2 in terms of the long shot, I'm going to say FC Dallas. And, the thing about Dallas is that they're also kind of a team that is inconsistent, especially on the attack. But one thing that I really think why I put FC Dallas in the long shot category is the fact that they have to play on the road. Road form is just been a huge problem for Dallas this season. And, you probably also ask, well, if that is the case, then why did you put Columbus in tier number 2 when they also are another team that struggle on the road? Yeah, the difference is that Columbus at least will get one home game that is going to be play at Montreal Stadium, whereas for Dallas, all their game is going to be on the road, at least if they're not going to, if they are going to be playing against even a lower seed team against them, then maybe they could get a home playoff game. But the road is definitely a huge struggle for them this season, and going to Portland against a Timbers team that wants to make another deep playoff run, that is going to be a really tall task to ask for FC Dallas, and that I think they definitely are one of those teams that has a long odds in terms of going all the way. Now, at number 3, I am going to say the Red Bulls. And again, the Red Bulls, I would say they're kind of something similar to what the Quakes is, where this is another team that at times they can show like they can beat anybody, and a team that looked like the old Red Bulls team that used to be considered one of the best team in the Eastern Conference. But then there are times where they just inexplicably lose to some very, very bad team, and it's kind of hard to figure out which version of the Red Bulls are we going to get. And as I said before about how if you're going to make a deep playoff run, you cannot have inconsistency. You cannot have these kind of question about, are we going to get the good version of this team, or are you going to get the bad version of this team? Because if you get a bad version of a team in that single game, and since we're going with single elimination, there's no second chances, and there's no that, the next game we're going to get the good version again, and we can overturn that. Like maybe in the old playoff system when we had a two-legged affair in terms of the conference semifinal and the conference final, you can afford to do that. Not in this new format where everything is going to be single elimination, and you just have to be on your A game every single game if you're going to move on into the next round. Now, at number 4, I'm going to say the Montreal Impact. Again, Montreal, I think this is kind of the same reason. I would say with the Red Bulls, where the Impact, they definitely have some times where they can definitely be a very good team, and that attack also at times could be very lethal. But then there's also times where they just look like one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. And you know what? Just by saying that, I'm just going to put the last team on there too, because I think at the end of the day, all five of these teams that I consider a long shot kind of share a similarity, where they're a team that kind of always have inconsistency. And, you know, Inter Miami, I will say that they are considered, if you want to talk about who's the worst team coming into the playoffs, no doubt it's got to be Inter Miami, with the way that they just barely squeak into the playoffs. And that the only thing that maybe could make Inter Miami dangerous is that if Gonzalo Higuain, Pizarro, or even Matuidi can really step up and carry this team, and that's a big if, because we haven't seen it all season long. And that for Montreal, again, you know, if their attack can get clicking, and that if Bojan can continue to score for some golazo as he has done in the past couple of games, and Kyoto continue to be the probably their most important attacking piece on that team, then maybe they can definitely win a game or two in the playoffs. But if they're going to have like the bad version of themselves, where they struggle in terms of creating anything, then yeah, they're probably going to have an early exit in the playoffs, and most likely they're going to be one of the first one to be out of this playoffs. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of looking at all 18 of these teams, and I basically put them into 4 tiers. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? Do you agree with some of these teams and where I put in the tiers? And if you disagree, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.